Good day and welcome to Observations. On this program, we're going to do something we haven't done in a while. We're going to have a co-host actually lead this discussion. Kirk, who has contributed to the Shattering Myth shows and to the initial Observations program, is prepared to share with us what he has learned about the transition that occurred in America. This place in time where America became the merchant of death, the world's premier manufacturer of weapons of all kinds, and the world's largest military, as well as implementing the world's most elaborate spy apparati, as well as developing the world's largest prison population. America became the very things that it said that it detested. When did that occur? How did that occur? Now, Observations is a program that is devoted to understanding Yahowah's testimony and how it applies to our lives. But as Kirk will share, Yahowah has a lot to say about human governance. The most elaborate discussion is found in the first book of Samuel. Listen to him, Samuel, beginning in the 8th chapter, where the children of Israel wants to have a king like other Gentile nations. And Yahowah's response to this is amazing. It's insightful, profound. And it's amazing that it's so seldom discussed. I think it's so seldom discussed mainly because it is so contrary to most things that we humans have been led to believe. So, Kirk, the program is yours. I'm looking forward to listening to what you have discovered.
Okay. Well, I'm going to leave the Samuel section for a minute until we just get into the program a little bit. What prompted me to do some extra research, I like history, and I had run across some things that connected some dots that I had not considered in the past, or I couldn't prove certain things had happened, pardon me. And I was thinking with the backdrop of the prophecies regarding pestilence, and then also with World War I and the next two World Wars. And I was trying to see if there's anything I could gain from studying World War I and World War II. And the deeper I got into it, and nowadays with the use of a computer, which I'm not good at, but I'm getting a little bit better, I can research in so many different directions, and I can usually find a right or wrong answer to the things that I was exposing. Either this happened or it didn't happen. There's enough proof to believe it or enough to reject it.
Yeah, for example, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. And when I read things or send things that appear in secondary periodicals or online sources, blogs, the first thing you do is, if it's written in such a way that it says, there's no way, I'll usually just discount it out of hand. But if it is appears like it's credible, then what you have to do is verify whether or not the information in that the person is basing a claim on is true. And it takes some time, but some of the most unbelievable, some of the most outrageous things are actually true.
Right.
And it really paints a horrible picture. It's really why I went from being a active person in politics and a patriot to being anti-political and anti-patriotic. It's the investigation on these kinds of things. So with that in mind, yeah, I'm with you. This is something that's important. In fact, Larry, I think, is an individual who has chased down a lot of these rumors as to whether or not they hold water, whether or not they're true. So you were confronted with some things that seemed amazing.
They were, and
indicting.
I'm not a conspiracy person in the sense that there's a bunch of people behind the scenes trying to hide everything. In fact, everything is pretty much out in the open. All you have to do is connect the dots, and there's nothing that I'll say today that you couldn't find and prove it for yourself. But the things were so sickening to me especially when you confine it to just pestilence and germ warfare. That it was, and I don't know how people can think this way. It has to be a satanic thing that gets into you to do so. But I wanted to talk about World War I, but in order to get into World War I for the listeners, I know you know a lot about this, and I know probably Larry knows a lot about this, but I was going to paint a very quick picture of the decaying empires of Europe that led up to World War I, and what some of their ambitions were, and what motivated people to start that war, and then for us to why and how we got into it. And just briefly, and throw in anything you want as I go along the way, but you have...
and by the way, keep in mind that the story of World War I, while the story tells us that tens of millions of people were killed, the real story of World War I isn't the horror of what was the most demonic battlefield, probably in human history. The real story and the cost of World War I is the epidemic that's called the Spanish flu, that was neither Spanish nor flu, that killed 40 to 50 million people worldwide.
I have bigger numbers that are probably right, and some of them are government numbers. They've held those off, but we'll set the stage on who the players were, and then I'll get you into how we got there and why America jumped in, and quite a discussion about our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson. But for those of you who are not that familiar on history, in Europe you have, of course, a fading empire in England, Victoria as queen, leading up to that. And of course they're holding on for dear life with India and certainly the ports of China. And they are financially broke. A little aside to that is you might not know, most people are kind of stunned by this. The English were drinking a lot of tea and importing it. Their balance of payments were terrible. And they had to pay so much money, and this was real money in the old days. You had to pay in silver and gold. And they started opium. They started bringing opium in from India into China to equalize the balance of payments. So they're having all kind of mess. They're terribly immoral, as we know. They were killing people everywhere they went. And I grew up in Australia. All you have to do is just do a little research. This is an immoral empire that's collapsing. You've got
the East Indian Trading Company, correct?
Well, they dominated the whole of India and Pakistan. They got Burma. And that was the last, as their empires collapsed, as we broke away, and most of the Commonwealth nations that were part of the empire, they broke away to some degree with certain agreements. We have an empire that cannot be stretched this far because it's built on raw goods for pennies that they can sell for thousands.
Yeah, you know what's amazing, too, is that most Americans view Great Britain very favorably, and we view them as our ally. But in the area of God, since that is the focus of this program, there is no country on earth that at least over the last 100 years has been as disastrous to the lives of the chosen people as Great Britain. While Germany was the hammer, and Germany brought us the concentration camps, the death camps, it was actually Great Britain's malfeasance that made them possible. And the mess that we see in the Middle East today, that is the vice that is designed to crush Israel, is of Great Britain's creation.
So, yes, prove it to you later. Yeah.
Okay, so it's no small potatoes when we're talking about Great Britain. And Larry, you've spent some time in conspiratorial circles. There is a general feeling that Great Britain still wags America's tail, that they are...
I believe they are the dog.
They are the dog, and we're the tail. Yeah. We're their tool.
Well, I mean, you did some extensive work about the creature from Jekyll Island, and it was exactly 10 years after that, or maybe a little more. It was in 1928 that that MI5 came over and helped set up the CFR and buy all the newspapers, and they have controlled, American political landscape ever since.
Yeah, it's amazing that America's newspapers actually the transition to independence to a collective in America's newspapers and media all began as part of Woodrow Wilson's scheme to deceive Americans to justify lying on his campaign promises and to drag America into war that it had no business being in. But the American newspapers and media became a conglomerate, if you will, to make it possible for Woodrow Wilson and company, and Great Britain, because it was also Churchill that was involved in this, to have the Lusitania sunk deliberately to justify American troops going into
it was
that
loaded
war.
with munitions.
Right, and the newspapers were all given money from Germany to run ads to tell what was going to occur and why it was being used this way before it even set sail. And to keep those newspapers from running those advertisements and those editorials, America saw to it that they were purchased and became a collective. And so this is an enormous part of the transition here. So go ahead, Kirk. So you're setting the stage. What were the conditions in Europe?
Well, the conditions in Europe, so first of all, you've also got France is losing their grip on everything. They still have Algeria and they still have Indochina, but that's about the extent of their empire. Russia, as we know about at the turn of the early 1900s, is falling apart financially, primarily because Nicholas has spent all the money. They've lived lavishly and they're very poor.
Right. And it was this war that ultimately brought them down, because and it was in the midst of this war the Bolshevik revolution took place, where the Tsar and his family were murdered by socialists who were living in and advancing their cause in all places in America.
Right. And by the way, just for the uninitiated, Nicholas was the cousin to Victoria, and as was Wilhelm, or Willie, cousin Willie, the Kaiser of Germany, as was, Nicholas being the Tsar. And the Tsar and Kaiser are the roots of Caesar, by the way.
Yes, yeah, and they all were an amalgamation of cleric and king. This was the Roman Catholic Church, either as the Russian Orthodox Church, which grew out of the Eastern Russian or the Eastern Roman Church, or variations of it, and they had all imposed their legitimacy based upon an amalgamation, integration of religion and politics. These were all related scumbags.
Aren't really Windsors, they're Gulfs, they're Germans, for one thing.
So you've got also another big factor, two other big factors. I won't worry too much about the Ottoman Empire or Italy, the small potatoes, and Ottoman is just broke. As I remember, you sent us a book. You had a guest one time, and that was quite insightful on how they were in the throes of inflation, because they had also spent all the money. So they were a broke empire for all practical purposes. But the two that are most...
And by the way, so what the common denominator of every one of these countries is they're broke.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the lead up to World War I, which began in 1917, ended in the fall of 1918. What happened around the world just 4 years prior to that? Larry, do you know what happened in 1913?
There was a depression.
Well, yes, but what happened in America that is profound, that would lead directly to the world having gone broke because they overspent? What happened in America?
That was Social Security.
Nope. 1913. Woodrow Wilson and Colonel House met sent their team to Jekyll Island, by the way, with a few Brits.
Right. Yeah, and then right after that, Woodrow Wilson instituted the Social Security Act.
Well, he implemented two things. One is the The Federal Reserve was created in 1913, which is a central bank, and then the federal income tax in 19. So he had the means to rob Americans of their wealth, and he had the means for the first time to create fiat money. And America did not act alone. Jekyll Island was not simply an American undertaking. It happened also with other countries in Europe, and the world made the migration to fiat money and central banks in 1913. And so by 1917, all of those countries that had done so were broke. Why? Because the politicians, the clerics and kings, could spend the next leader's money. They could indebt their country and try to create spending that would create the illusion of prosperity. And they could also borrow money to go to war. So I think that the single most important act in creating the environment for World War I is the creation of central banks like the Federal Reserve in 1913 in the United States of America, and then the imposition of a national confiscation scheme called the federal income tax. Those two things occurred at that time.
The way they set that up, the way they set that up. 3 years, the world. People wearing costumes and getting on trains anonymously.
Within 4 or 5 years, 100 million people would die.
Right. Or more.
Okay, go ahead. So that's all right. So
we got two other players that we need to just throw out on the table so everybody can see the picture. You've got, which is quite important, you have the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Austrian Empire was collapsing as well. And if you, in my era, that was the southern part of the Hungarian Empire was most of Yugoslavia, where you have Serbs and Croatians and all these different makeups, from Roman Catholics to Greek Orthodox to Muslims to on and on and on and on. So you've got this really hard to keep together group. But for some reason, the Austrians were very good at putting that together for quite a while. But it's kaput now at this stage of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Germany, which is under Wilhelm.
Mm-hmm.
And cousin Willie, he's got a plan to break them out. You have to remember that Germany has cold water ports and no energy. Now, the whole world has changed since the Industrial Revolution, because you have now everything is run on metals and everything is run on gas and oil. You can have a steam shovel, or you can have a gas-fired furnace or a coal furnace. They have coal, but they don't have oil, and you need oil if you're going to build a big navy.
Right.
So that's changes. That's just technological changes that have happened. So, but you still got to have a port. Now, it's the same thing that affects Russia today. It's the same thing that would affect Germany today. The goal of Willie, and this terrorized everything I read. This kind of terrorized everyone in England and France, because his goal was to pick up the pieces basically of Austro-Hungarian Empire and take it all the way down to the Middle East where he could get the oil. You know, Hitler tried to do the same thing.
Right.
We know Russia has been trying to do the same thing one way or the other through the period. So that scared the British Empire, sort of scared the French Empire to death, because if they get to the oil, then they are extraordinarily powerful. And now Germany's aligned with, just for a little more backdrop information, Germany and Germany and the Austrian Empire are joined together. France, England, and to a degree Russia.
Yeah, this is the ultimate. This is an absolute in-your-face conspiracy.
Yeah,
right? So what this is we're not hiding it in any way here.
No.
This is worldwide conspiracy on behalf of Cleric and King.
Right.
Yeah, not hidden. No, you don't even need to look at the Council on Foreign Relations. You don't need to look at the Round Table or the De Bilderbergers. This is world conspiracy. Truly open for the world to see, and the immediate consequence of this was not only world war but world plague.
Yeah. Halal Ben Shakar will tell you right to your face.
Yes.
You know, that's the only comparable That's the only comparison I can draw. I mean,
right.
These people are satanic.
Yeah, this was right in your face, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not like you got to go looking for it. All you got to do is study it.
Right. So if you want to look at what a world conspiracy would be like in terms of war and plague, you know, the great contributors to death, you don't have to look any further than the way the world set up between 1913 and 1918.
Mm-hmm. So now when you read in your history books and you've got the Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and you have that story of Duke Ferdinand, Franz Ferdinand and his wife getting shot in 1914, that pretty much just allows Germany to say, okay, we have to protect all the Germans. So that gives them a chance to go down and do this, do the dirty deed, invade. And that scares Russia. And that certainly scares France and England, because now they know and if they didn't know before, they certainly know what they're doing now. Now, consider something for just a minute is if Germany goes down through here, Russia has to live up to the agreement with France and England. They have to attack. They don't have any money.
Right.
France is pretty much broke, too. The English pound sterling is based on paper money now. Because they can't afford to use real money, they'd go broke very, very, very quick, and they do even then.
But with fiat money, do you know of a nation with fiat money with a central bank that solved, at least by appearances, the fact that they were in a Great Depression by going to war?
Germany.
And how about the United States?
Well, the United States, we went into greenbacks in the Civil War.
We did it. Yeah, we did it in the Civil War, but we also did it for World War II. That's the thing. We probably
financed the Spanish-American War with it as well. I don't know, but verbatim, but regardless, that's what you have to. You got to pay the troops.
Right.
There's
and you got to buy the weapons.
Yeah. Well, that in too. But interesting little fact. A lot of people don't seem to know. There's the difference between a commissioned officer and a non-commissioned officer in the Army.
No. Why do they use commission and non-commission as the terms? But I know that you're dealing with officers and enlisted.
No,
but go ahead.
It's not quite that simple. The non-commissioned officers can be a rank of a major, the same equivalent. However, these are the groups of soldiers that their only contract is, as long as you pay me, I have to do what you tell me. If you're a commissioned officer, you have to go to war whether they pay you or not. You're part of the club. You have a percentage of the take. That's the way it was set up.
You have a commission. Wow. Yeah, commission would be a percentage of the take.
Right.
That's an interesting observation.
It's take on these things, and if you see the luck, if you were to study the Spanish-American War and the
commission is an economic term, right?
Oh yeah, they not only did they get economics, they got basically slaves to work for them, the Filipinos, and the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
It was very much like the British Empire in India. So that was that. But that's a little aside. We'll go back to the big war, because I know it's a lot of material, and I don't want to get everybody.
That term commissioned officer, though, I don't doubt that at some level, maybe in the senior officers corps, from lieutenant colonel up or something like that, there might be some commission, but I don't believe there is for your typical lieutenant, captain. So
no. In the old days, it was an old British system that we adapted, apparently, from everything.
Okay, yeah, they're calling it commission. Yeah, there is a difference too in the oath. You take an oath to the president as an officer, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, an oath to the president.
Oath to the president.
Yeah, to a man. Yeah, as the commander in chief. Isn't that interesting?
So basically, we're back to the wars. They're living up to their agreements. Germany's invading. They're fighting on two fronts with the French and the English, and they're fighting the Russians. Now, the interesting thing that's overlooked a lot is that Germany, in about the first year of the World War I, destroys most of Russia on what they call which would be Western Russia, eastern front to Germany. They capture everything. If you really want best way to describe it is probably from Poland, Estonia, all the way down to the Ukraine and down to most of Yugoslavia. and that represents about 50% of all the wealth, the people, the industrial strength of Tsarist Russia. And that's the point when Lenin is allowed to go through Germany. Germany really is the one that supports him the most. They send him over there and support him to take over and keep him busy fighting. Which ultimately he will the Socialist Party over. It was started Socialist Party over there, and that takes Russia out of the equation for the rest of the war because they just don't have any money.
Correct. You know, the first thing that Lenin did is sign an armistice with the Germans.
Yes,
so they opted out. And by the way, the first American troops in World War I did not go to the battlefields of France. They went to Russia, where they were positioned on behalf of Lenin and company, the communists.
Right. Aren't we special?
Oh, we are special.
Another interesting point there is that they wanted to make it look like the Jews invented socialism or communism. And that was not true. That was invented off an island by the Jesuits. But when they marched out the Bolshevik Revolution, what they did was they had a bunch of guys dressed as Jewish guys with Yiddish signs. I mean, they were so beloved that, you know, when Stalin came in, he was the great Jew hater. Just incredible. Blame the Jews. You know, it's just there's a theme throughout the world on that.
Yeah, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a complete fraud. You know, it was actually a French novel where it was so thin, and the perpetrators were so lame that they simply changed the title and changed the name of the characters, but left the rest of the story intact. It was more prevalent in communist Russia than it was even in Nazi Germany. So.
Yeah. So, well, in any case, now you've got stalemate on the Eastern Front. You've got all kind of stuff going on the Western Front, and the Germans moving towards the ultimate goal of making it to the Middle East. Now, if the stalemate was so bad, I think personally, and I'm just my comment, I would think personally that if they had left it alone and we had not entered, they would have settled up with a treaty. Most things end with a treaty.
Oh, yeah, because we had England, which was providing, because, you know, Germany could not occupy England and was occupying much of France, that Germany, or England was the place where the war materials were supplied on behalf of the Allied nations, and Germany had no credit. So America was the source of Germany's credit, and it was strictly based upon the fact that the Germans came so close to prevailing, and that England was going to welch on all of the loans that had been made by American banks, and through the purchase, America is supposed to be neutral, but they were purchasing American weapons, that to a large degree, maybe to the largest degree, America entered the war to save the American banks.
Yeah. Well, I think it's more complicated than that, but that's certainly one of the motives. I mean, that's how you get everybody on your side. But
well, I mean, it's a well-known fact, and I know you're getting the whole sinking of the Lusitania joke. I mean,
let's get people on board. You know, you got to have that with the news, so people will actually go.
Because you want to rile up patriotism so that people think that they're doing a service to God and country by making a sacrifice and going over and fighting the bad guys. You know, that's why Woodrow Wilson created at this time a propaganda council, the first time America had ever had one. And the purpose of the propaganda council was to draw Germans as this bloodthirsty monsters and to create this imagery of God and country for America that was the shining light that would go and thwart the bloodthirsty monster. And he created a propaganda industry to do that.
There was only one president in history that ever had a Ph.D. Guess who that was?
Oh, yeah. Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
From Princeton.
Christian too.
Yeah, so. he was also a racist.
Yeah, sure. Well, most of these guys are very racist.
Yeah, they're racist. Yeah, Woodrow Wilson is such a racist now that his images, his statues are being obliterated from Princeton as we speak.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm going to tell you about a reason. Because now I'm going to show you the story behind the Spanish influenza.
Okay.
President Woodrow Wilson had a dream. And it's the first time I can find something where it was called the New World Order. That's the terms he actually used, or his organization used to tell it.
It was kind of his 14-point plan that he came up with at this point, articulating there'll be no imperialism, and then America becomes the leading imperialist in the world.
Exactly. Yeah, here we have some music.
Yeah, we will be back in a moment, and we will continue with observations. A case can be made that Woodrow Wilson is the most evil, most counterproductive man to ever occupy the White House. And that's saying a lot, considering the scumbags that have infested that building. But you were speaking, Kirk, about Woodrow Wilson having a dream.
Yes. Woodrow Wilson had a dream, and he called it the New World Order. And he wanted to control the world, like most emperors. And he saw opportunity to do it. And one of the ways that...
Now, just to put a little credibility here.
Sure, okay.
Woodrow Wilson was the power by the fall of 1918, because the rest of Europe had spent themselves in this war into oblivion. And so America's was able, through deficit spending, to continue to have resources, or at least the impression of being able to supply resources. And so Woodrow Wilson imposed his 14-point plan, his New World Order, on the world. And he told the Europeans, you will either accept my plan, not just Germany. He says, you will either accept this plan, or you're all on your own. You can deal with the Germans on your own. So as credibility for the fact that he had a New World Order plan, if you read the history of how World War II came to a conclusion in 1918, and the terms of that war and how it led to World War II, what Wilson's real plan was, yeah, it's emblazoned all over our history books.
All right. I'm going to talk a minute about the real seedy side of germ warfare.
Okay.
You could go for days on all these subjects, but this one is so disgusting. It just.
So Woodrow Wilson wanted to be the de facto world leader, the de facto messiah of the world, and one of the tools that you say he envisioned deploying was biological warfare.
Yeah, he was approached by a Surgeon General whose name was Burgos, and for the lack of and when he approached him with a proposition, he said to him, "What if you could win the war in Europe and you could redefine all the boundaries, and basically, or even just create new countries?" And Woodrow, of course, thought that was a wonderful idea, and he said, "What's it going to cost?" And he said, "Well, it'll cost probably about 20 million lives." These are government records from somebody had dug up, and I'm going, but it's pretty easy to prove this is the way it went. So they chose to go for it. Now, I want to put one little side about the Surgeon General Burgos. What a lot of people don't know is when you are if you're a regular doctor, you sign on to the Hippocratic Oath. You pledge that, right? Which is I will do no harm. When you're an Army doctor, you do not sign the Hippocratic Oath.
Okay.
When a Surgeon General tells you something, remember, he is not sworn to do no harm. He can do whatever he wants.
Okay. Oh, by the way, what does Yahowah have to say about swearing an oath, even if it's an oath to do no harm?
Anyone.
Don't do it. If you swear an oath to any human institution, then you have estranged yourself from God. That you have in God's view, that you have aligned yourself with evil. That's the opening stanza of the 6th proverb. So I just want to make it clear that if by listening to this, if for some reason someone thinks that that swearing the Hippocratic oath as a doctor is a good thing, not from God's perspective, but being bound by nothing in terms of a moral code may be even worse.
Right. You know, Wilson did get most of that 14-point plan.
Oh, he did. He got all of it. He got all of it.
Yeah, except now the League of Nations is the UN. I mean,
right, but that's was simply just change the name.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But go ahead, Kirk. Yeah, well, here's the horror story that I dug up.
Okay.
And if you look hard enough, you'll find it too. Apparently, the Army doctors had been working on the bird flu. Now, I did a little work on the side. It was interesting. Roy sent me something, not knowing what I was going to be talking about, but he sent me something that was quite interesting. What I studied was that all flus are bird flus, right. And they transferred from the dinosaurs, and then they mutated.
Mm-hmm.
And for hundreds of years, the Chinese people, because they were such peasants, were living in rather squalid conditions in China, mm-hmm. and they lived among their chickens and their pigs, mm-hmm. and pure squalor. You know, you have a lot of water when you're growing rice on little paddies and so forth, and that's the subsistence of living there. And this, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of years. And the flu was well developed in China. And most of these government doctors that I've discovered were studying different flus and stuff and different diseases around the world, and certainly the ones in China. And what they were able to do is bring back the strands of that virus, and didn't know what to do with it. Well, I guess they did know what to do with it. I shouldn't say that, but the plans were to use that on the battlefields at this stage, where it brings us up to date. The Burgos, or one of his representatives, ordered the use of these samples on American troops. They did it at Fort Riley, Kansas, in 1914. Now,
yeah, that was actually the second deployment of this disease, which, by the way, was very similar to anthrax today. Mm-hmm. The first deployment was 1 year earlier. 90% of the National Guard that were protecting America's southern border on horseback were rendered incompetent, incapable of action, and their horses too. It affected both the horse and the men, and it brought 90% of them to their knees, killed most of them. But that was 1 year prior to the Kansas experiment.
Mm-hmm. And in that Kansas experiment, what they did is they had regulars, Army regulars. Right. They also had enlisted prisoners from San Quentin, very disposable people. Mm-hmm. Get them out, they could join the Army. Mm-hmm. Unlike any other time in the early American history, they were not segregated, so they had a lot of African Americans as well.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, do you know why they were in Kansas? What was happening? What was happening at this point? What happened at this point is that Woodrow Wilson had decided that he was going to create patriotism by creating all these patriotic images for Americans, and to glorify the military, he reestablished the draft, and then he created this boogeyman. The boogeyman happened to be Germans, and so Americans by the millions were flooding into these military bases, these army bases, to sign up to go do their patriotic duty to go kill some Germans. And so there was this huge influx of young Americans into these facilities. And by the way,
great place to run an experiment.
Yeah, but by the way, I don't think. And I've done a fair amount of research in the last few days on this. I don't think that the disease was actually flu. I am quite certain that the disease that killed at least 50 million people, none of the symptoms were flu-like. It destroyed and caused internal bleeding of all of the organs. From the time that you caught it to the time you were dead was usually 24 hours.
Wow.
And the other part of it that is so interesting is that every avian flu epidemic has killed vulnerable young people that don't have immunity to children, and the old. This did not.
No.
This killed military-aged individuals.
Yeah,
So,
rate 20 times higher than the previous quote flu did.
That is correct. But the reason it was called the Spanish flu is because America became a censored nation. Woodrow Wilson took over the media by way of the banking interests to be able to sink without any prying eyes the Lusitania, to get Americans to rally around his desire to go to war. And so America was a propagandist nation. You could only say what the government wanted you to say. And so when this epidemic broke out in that Kansas base and then was spread, there was no concern over it in the military, no discussion of it in the military, and no public discussion of it. And so the reason it was called the Spanish flu is Europe had also become censored in terms of their speech, but Spain was neutral. And so Spain still had an independent press. And although Spain's death toll was minuscule by comparison to other nations, it was labeled the Spanish flu because it was the only nation in the world that was actually writing about it.
Well, the reason they were probably writing about it is because, you know, they disembarked tons of people there that were infected. Or were affected after the fact. They went over in boxcars. They went unrefrigerated boxcars with the dead as well. Spain agreed to allow them to disembark troops there because they had, you remember, they had already been beat up pretty bad in the Spanish-American War, and we picked them.
Yeah,
Something to let them in.
Yeah, there you go. So when the death became rampant there. By the way, you're talking about this test was in the spring of 1918. It's the summer of 1918 that America deployed troops in Europe and in World War II. So immediately after, within 90 days of the pandemic, America is taking these same men that are dying by the tens of thousands and is infecting Europe with them. Deliberately, knowingly infecting Europe with them. And
I told him, he said, it cost you about 20 million lives.
Right.
But
so
it
was a lot more than that. That's
it's going to be.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. And by the way, you know, of the Americans that died in the military, you know what percentage of them died of the flu? You know,
100%.
But the numbers range, depending on which source you read, between 60 and 80% of the Americans who died in World War I, they didn't die at the hands of the enemy. They did.
Some don't. You know, they died from dysentery and all.
No. I'm not talking about they died from dysentery.
No. But I mean,
they died of this deliberate disease.
Deliberate thing, yeah.
Yeah, let's call it the flu, although its base was influenza, but it was a weaponized version of it.
I got a question for you guys here. This is a good question now. You know, they make rock stars out of all these presidents. They build monuments to them. Apparently, like
Woodrow Wilson has a library over there in Central Virginia.
Yeah, and all this nonsense.
Big white building.
When it comes out, when things like this come out, and they're just factually known now, why the hell is not all the wealth from their families confiscated and everything else? It should be.
It should be.
Then you might do it to the current ones.
Well, I agree with you. They're arch criminals.
They are.
Right.
So you know, I mean, we are conditioned to believe that once you get something out to the media, the media that they control, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
That somehow this stops the process.
No, it doesn't. No. But a lot of that is because of the fact that political correctness has rendered most people in America and Europe incapable of processing information and exercising good judgment regarding it. So it doesn't matter what case you make. The realization is that it doesn't affect people. Now, I'm going to interject here something, Kirk.
Yes.
Let's say that it's difficult to prove that America weaponized the flu.
Okay.
Even though it is absolutely provable that the United States was developing chemical and biological warfare agents at that time, as was Germany, as was France, as was Russia, and that there is ample evidence that America was one of those nations trying to do this, and their justification is, well, the other guys are doing it, so we need to be able to respond in kind. So America was developing biological and chemical agents to deploy in war at this time. No question about that. No question about the fact that this disease, this pandemic, was first introduced in with America's National Guard, and then when it incapacitated 90% of them and their horses, which at the time was the primary weapon of war, and it incapacitated 90% of them, it next made its way into the military facility in Kansas, where troops by the tens of thousands were being recruited based upon the propaganda machine that Woodrow Wilson had established. These are all known facts.
Right.
Now, whether or not we weaponized it, whether or not we deliberately infected them, the fact is they were dying by the tens of thousands in America. We knew they were dying by the tens of thousands in America. The military knew it. The President of the United States knew it. He knew that he had he had drawn them into these military facilities on a pile of lies, and he knew that he had arranged to have the Lusitania sunk to justify all of this, and he knew that he was doing it for economic reasons, for his New World Order, and so at the very least, he knowingly infected the world with this pandemic that wiped out a minimum of 50 million people, and he did it knowingly and deliberately.
Well, that's
a hell of a coincidence.
Now that you cannot. So whether or not you say that he actually had our military infect our own people with this disease, with these diseases, that's a question. Matter of fact, it appears, actually, this is what's really so interesting. It appears that the 90% of our National Guard mounted horsemen on the border who were infected and became incapacitated, that they were actually infected based upon a plot that a group of German Americans collectively had worked on. And that we witnessed the effectiveness of that, as did Germany. And then both Germany and America became the leaders in developing this capability, because they saw in 1916. They saw in 1916 its overwhelming capacity to prevail. And at this time, Germany was motivated in this regard, because they knew if they launched their final initiative prior to America sending troops and machines over, that they would prevail. And so anything that they could do to diminish America's capacity to send troops over, they were all over. And so there is the real possibility that the Germans were complicit in this as well.
Except you have all these pictures from the Kansas of them, all these doctors examining all these people, and you have the record of the cook, whose name was Mitchell, who fed all these people. He was he was extremely sick. He served about 75,000 troops directly with his people in Kansas. I mean,
what I'm saying here is that it appears that the Germans were responsible for the incapacitation of 90% of our National Guard, our mounted National Guard, and that the military and Woodrow Wilson took note of that. Yeah. And the next place that we see this, and it's equally deadly. In fact, it's even more deadly, is in these camps that have been established for the patriotic recruits for World War I.
Yeah.
And what you're saying now is that in America's records, there's all sorts of affirmations that the Wilson administration deliberately infected Americans that were destined, that had volunteered and were destined to go to Europe with this disease, making them, in effect, they were suicide bombers.
Yeah, well, that was Burgos' plan, Dr. Burgos. He said, I can help you do this. Yeah. I mean, you still got to send troops and all this sort of thing, but you can finance them. They just had it covered from every aspect they wanted. Now, depending on what results you want to read, though.
By the way, 500,000 Americans died of this disease. 500,000 Americans, at least.
Worse than that, because when the soldiers came back, and affected all the peripheral people, the nurses and so forth, came back, so many of them, we probably killed about 20 million people in America alone, which is an enormous population. They have pictures of the Red Cross because of the influenza, they called it the Spanish flu. Because of that, and post-World War I, and the return, coincidentally, the return of the troops and these people, the cities, it was such a big epidemic, there were not enough coffins so they couldn't bury them. They were building them in mass graves. We have pictures of that. The Red Cross assisted in that. They built buildings on top of these people, these graves.
Oh, I'm reading in 1 month, in October of 1918, okay? 200,000 dead.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking millions.
And there was a genuine attempt to mislabel this the flu, because it was much more deadly than the bubonic plague. You know, the Black Death. And in the 14th century, it was not nearly this deadly. So they did not want to label it accurately for fear of alarming people. And communication was so controlled at that time that much of what occurred during that time was manipulated to keep people from knowing, A, what the cause was, and B, what the extent was. So it is difficult to know the number that were killed.
Well, here's the net results of all this, all the multiple factors. Between 1918, 19, and 20, you can, depending on who you want to read, 100 million people across the world died from this, up to as many as 200 million, according to some government army records. Pick your number. But because, it spread through Europe, it also came back to America. There was Africa, and it went to Africa, Asia, and even Russia.
And the numbers that suggest that it was 40 to 50 million people. Do you know what country was by far the most victimized in the world in terms of let's call it the official records? The United States was second on the official record list with almost 600,000 on the official records list. But they were just a tiny smattering of the country that was worst. What happened to Great Britain? What was their greatest loss at this time? Who were they most PO'd with? Who were they? They're just trying desperately to hang on to, and to be able to continue to rob and rape for their very existence. What nation?
India.
India.
Oh, India.
Yeah.
So India is the place that was most devastated by it.
No, imagine that.
So
imagine that.
Say Africa and Asia and even Russia and all that. They know these numbers. These numbers haven't been hid from anybody.
Yeah.
You have to dig.
12 million.
They're there if you look.
Yep.
So the net result after that is you have Woodrow Wilson. He's awarded what? The Nobel Peace
Prize. Yeah.
God bless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he forms the League of Nations.
Oh, by the way, and of course, Nobel. What was Nobel's? How did Nobel make his fortune?
Newspapers, right?
No.
No.
Nobel is the fellow that figured out how to turn nitroglycerin into dynamite and therefore have a stabilized version of that explosive power, which then became the mechanism to fight wars where you could kill millions of people as opposed to thousands of people.
And interesting.
Yeah. Nobel was one of the world's leaders in the manufacturing of war material. There's your Nobel Peace Prize.
Okay, for the
by the way, Yasser Arafat, the terrorist who plagued Israel. Jimmy Carter, who was a part of all of that. The guy that started the first Afghan war, and then wouldn't send Americans to Russia because of the Russians being bad and starting a war with Afghanistan when we in fact had started it. Yep. Okay. So it doesn't paint a very good picture. So
because it'll help you understand the whole reason for this is because the reason I called in the second hour is all the time. It's a lot more fun talking about Yahowah than it is talking about our disgusting thing. But I think it's
but Yahowah talks about our disgusting thing. He talks about human government, and it's about 40 to 50%. Of his attention is on the things that are wrong with human leadership, with human governance, with human religion, with human institutions, because there is no way that you're going to do what is required to be part of the covenant, which is that's the prerequisite, to leave them. What's your motivation for leaving them, to engage in a relationship with a God you don't not yet know, unless you understand that these institutions are corrupt, evil, working against your interest? If you're putting your hand over your heart and singing the national anthem and you're waving your flag and you think America is just swell, or that your church is a force for good in the world, then you're not going to walk away from them, which means that you have zero chance of participating in the covenant. So it's important that we expose this malfeasance, just as Yahowah did.
Use the word there, by the way, governance. That's a word I'm hearing more and more. It used to be government.
Yeah, now it's
governance. So I really looked that word up a couple of years back when I started hearing it all the time. And it's really any position of authority over you from anywhere. Right. That's what it really comes down
governance.
to.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was reading the first review that I clicked on for the Spanish flu. And what it said is that in essence, the end result of it in America was a huge increase in the size of the federal government, a huge diminishment in the freedoms of the American people, a huge transfer of wealth from the people to the government, a monumental increase in the size of the U.S. military, a huge change from America only being interested in what was happening on this continent to Americans now meddling in the world as a whole, Americans being willing to give up their wealth and their freedoms to sacrifice for the collective good. That's how they ended this most popular article on the Spanish War, is that it was the fundamental change in America. Yeah, the fundamental change.
That is bad.
Bad. The thing that turned America into the merchant of death for the world is Woodrow Wilson's scheme to get Americans into that war, and him making the death toll of that war many, many, many times greater as a result of biological warfare.
I had a good friend that did his dissertation on the Versailles Treaty. And, his contention is that the Versailles Treaty led to World War II.
Of course. Well, I don't think there's anybody that doubts that. But I mean, we blame the Versailles Treaty, the treaty that ended World War I, on the French and the British being greedy. But the terms and conditions that upon which Germany surrendered were imposed by Woodrow Wilson.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, he called the shots.
Yeah.
Now I forgot a teaser I was going to put in, but I know we're back to about post World War I.
Right.
And I was going to lay out what
by the way, what
added up the thing, but
other than salvaging American banks, and it's principally J.P. Morgan. Other than salvaging J.P. Morgan and America's now manufacturers of war materials, which would have gone broke because the lines of credit that J.P. Morgan advanced on behalf of England would not have been paid. They would have gone broke had Woodrow Wilson not engaged us in this war. So it benefited the manufacturers of war material, which the United States became the world's most dominant manufacturer of war material, still is by far, merchant of death. And it benefits America's banks by having Americans sacrifice their lives to shore up the money owed to those banks from the Allies in Europe. And we did all of that on a lie, sacrificing American lives for banking and industrial military interests, all as part of Woodrow Wilson's scheme for World War I.
Little teaser. Woodrow Wilson had a young man that he appointed to assistant of the Secretary of the Navy. He had a job. Do anybody know who he was?
Well, I can tell you the most influential individual. Welcome back to Observations. We're examining something that's extraordinarily sad. For those of you who are flag-waving, love it or leave it Americans, this should be an eye-opener to you. But the question that was lingering at the end of the last segment, Kirk, you may have a different individual, but I will tell you that the individual that was the most influential in the war, and with Woodrow Wilson, and the person that was Woodrow Wilson's envoy that imposed America's New World Order on Europe, that led directly to World War II, was Colonel House.
Well, yeah, that's not the one I was looking for, but this was, I understand Colonel House.
Yeah.
But the one that blew me away was FDR.
Wow.
And his job was to design for the military an invasion plan for every country on earth.
Wow. And we did it.
And
we did it.
And that explains a lot about his thinking in World War II. Yeah,
the fact of the matter is that his New World Order led directly to World War II.
Now, Woodrow abandoned him when he was running for senator or something later in New York, or congressman in New York, because he needed some of the bedfellows to do his cause. But the seeds were already grown. I mean, he knew how Roosevelt already knew how this deal works.
Yeah, because he appointed FDR prior to the war.
Yeah.
So that was all just planning stages at that point. Sure.
But see, that makes me think about Sherman, who they go to him and he says, all right, how do we get rid of the South? Well, we just burn everything. Well, who the hell with the people? Just burn everything they have.
Right.
And we have an Indian problem, so let's get rid of the Indians. What do we do? We'll cut off all their food. Kill, hire the guys and kill all the blacks.
Or have blankets that are infected with smallpox and offer them these blankets as a peace gift.
I mean, is this about the most sick society?
And then why don't we arm belligerent Indian tribes and say, rather than stealing your land, we'll give you weapons and you can go steal the land of these other Indians that we want eliminated. And then once they do that, then we turn on the Indians that were our allies.
Yeah, just like they did in Alabama. There were 4 big tribes: the Creek and the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Cherokee. Yeah. And they solicited all of them, along with the Seminoles, to fight the British.
Right.
And once they did, then they went out and raided them and destroyed the Creeks completely. Yeah. And the Trail of Tears led to Oklahoma. normal was primarily those from Alabama and up to the Appalachians were all taken off to Oklahoma. Hopefully along the way with the plan.
America turned on.
Those were 3 of the 5 civilized tribes.
Yeah.
Hey, Larry, I would ask you the last war that which is going to be World War III, the Syrian, Iraqi, Iranian, Saudi Arabian, Turkish, Russian, American conflict that we call the Syrian Civil War, that came out of the invasion of Iraq. Did America lie about its justification for invading Iraq?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the whole yellow cake uranium being a smoking gun, when we knew, in fact, that Saddam Hussein had not purchased it and did not purchase it, we lied. How about if we turn back the clock a little bit to Vietnam? Did we enter the Vietnam War on truth or lies?
That was a total lie.
Yeah, total lie.
Didn't even happen.
Gulf of Tonkin did not occur.
I know.
Did not occur. We Spanish-American War that preceded the war that we're talking about right now, by sinking of the Maine.
Right.
We sunk it to justify going to war.
That was another false flag.
The sinking of Lusitania was deliberately sunk for the express purpose of being able to declare war on Germany.
And Winston Churchill was in on that too.
He was,
okay?
absolutely.
I hear all these people quote Churchill and this and that, and I'm saying, why? He's just another one of them.
He is.
He was fighting in South Africa. He didn't care about those people, and there was no war to fight there.
No.
And
a country that would send its sons over to fight a chemical war in trenches, already infected with a disease that was more deadly than any bullet or bomb or chemical weapon, like mustard gas in that war, is savage. It's inhuman. It's merciless. It's revolting.
Anybody that's going to their own people to gain an advantage like that is just sick.
Yeah, a mass murderer.
They should be shot.
Yeah, I mean,
exposed.
There is a reverence for Woodrow Wilson, and yet Woodrow Wilson should be vilified more than Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, he's the great destroyer. He's the one that brought the Federal Reserve Bank into existence.
Correct.
I mean, they're robbing us to this day. We've known
the one that created the New World Order that led to World War II.
One dime of federal income tax stays on shore. And how many times do we see these political actors talk about how we need to raise taxes to fix those bridges?
Yeah.
Say what?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? All these programs they talk about when they know federal income tax doesn't stay onshore. It's immediately moved offshore.
Well, the one disclaimer I want to throw out at this point for the people that listen to this is that we're not actively seeking you to do anything.
Right, we're not.
Choose the government, fight the government, or any kind of silly stuff, or even vote.
Folks up in Oregon that are in an armed insurrection, no.
Yeah.
We don't want anyone to pick up a gun to go off and shoot anyone.
Yeah.
We want you to open your mind. We want you to exercise good judgment. We want you to stand up against this evil by dealing with it through words.
Yeah. And why not join the only straight game in town?
Which is Yahowah's Covenant. Yeah, Yahowah's Torah and Covenant.
I looked at all the angles. I really did. I looked at every angle there was before I decided to take Yahowah's team. It's the only winning team. There is no other winning team.
As I was studying, and this being my parting comment here for today, you guys can continue to chat about this, but as I was reading through, and I'm looking forward to doing the program next week with you on this topic of the 8th chapter of 1 Samuel, where Yahowah responds to Samuel is disgusted. He is so disgusted by the people's desire to impose a king like the other Gentile nations over their people, and it's Shaul, Paul, that he wants to impose, and so he's disgusted by it, and he goes to Yahowah and he says, "This is what they asked. How do you want me to respond to them?" And Yahowah says, I know you're saddened by this, and you probably think it's because they're tired of you, that they're rejecting you. And he said, no, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. Yeah, they're rejecting me. They have separated themselves from me by choosing to have a king, a government over them. So by choosing government, they have abandoned me. That's what he said. That's profound. Now, the second thing is really interesting. He begins to tell them, through Samuel, what they will be getting by rejecting him and choosing human institution. And the term that he uses is really interesting. It's mitzvah. He says the king's mitzvah is going to be as follows. The terms and conditions of the king's relationship with you. The king's covenant with you. And, in Yahweh's covenant, you're freed. Your children become Yahweh's children. You're empowered. You're enriched. Well, and he says that the king, he's going to have a covenant too. He uses mitzvah. He uses mitzvahs, the terms and conditions of that covenant. And the first thing he says is he's going to take your sons. Mm-hmm. What's the second thing he said he's going to do? This is the Woodrow Wilson thing. He took your sons. He poisoned your sons. And then what's the second thing? He's going to create the weapons of war, chariots.
Okay. I have that
so,
okay.
So he is going to do two things. He's going to steal your sons. Mm-hmm. And he's going to manufacture and then deploy them using weapons of war.
All right.
That's Yahweh's initial assessment of human governance. And yet, we all, not we all, but people, 99.99% of people accept that. Heck,
kind of interesting. You brought up J.P. Morgan. All the munitions that were put on there were done. They were owned by J.P. Morgan. They
of course
were
they were.
England and France.
Right.
6 million.
Right. J.P. Morgan negotiated the exclusive agency agreement with England to not only be the lone source of finance for these weapons, but to be the lone supplier of the weapons. He got it coming and going. And when England was about to lose that war, it's when he went to Woodrow Wilson and said, we've got to get America into the war, otherwise I'm going to go broke.
Yeah, everything's a banking interest. It's just astounding. Yeah. It's astounding. But, wow.
Okay. Well, let's proceed on if you're up to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
We'll go on with the what that meant in terms of a map, which is interesting because this will play out in regards to the coming of World War II. But this is approximately around by 1923. You've got the Ottoman Empire is totally wiped out in Europe, except a little piece over the Bosphorus on the other side on Europe's shore, but they are pretty much
has been
nothing. Yeah, and mostly just Turkey now. You've got Russia because they kind of stuck with the Allies a little bit at that point. They got Romania, but they still were lacking a lot of their territory, but they got some of it back. England took Transjordan, Egypt, and Iraq, amazingly. So that'll tell you where their interest would lie. France,
oil.
Of course. Oil. France, who was already controlling Algeria, they got Syria thrown in on the mix. Italy, a small player in the whole thing, was Libya and Serbia. And then Austria, unfortunately, they were the big loser, and still one of the big losers. They lost most of their territory. They contained, they did get Bosnia and Hungary. And Denmark got a little bit of the northern tip of Germany, so now they've got kind of Germany really boxed in. Germany has lost Austria and everything they had hoped to get from the start. They've lost a lot of what they had taken away from the Russians.
My God, Poland looked like an arm reaching into the
yeah,
heart.
Well, Poland wasn't really a nation, but I mean, that time was just part of the German territories at the time. But at the end of the Versailles thing, here are the countries which are interesting that Wilson set up, because he invented new countries. It had nothing to do with ethnicity. It's the way they do it in South America. It's the way we did it in Africa. I've often wondered why we divided everything up in the states, I guess, in the United States, so they could rule it better. Perhaps, I don't know. That's the distance.
Confusion.
But in Versailles, on the Treaty of Versailles, the new countries that the UN, which was Woodrow, or the League of Nations, we have Finland. They were part of Russia most of the time. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland. There wasn't a Poland per se as a country. Czechoslovakia, Hungary, which we call Yugoslavia from that point on until recently, Croatia, Romania, Albania, Bulgaria, and then the Ukraine eventually separates from it. And in that short span of time, we also have the Irish get their independence from, excluding Belfast and Northern Ireland. And Franco eventually overthrows the Democratic Party by 1931, a Democratic or parliamentarian government in France. So you've really got them all divided up. But now if you're Germany, keep in mind, if you're Germany and you're looking at all this, you're going to vow revenge. An interesting little aside. You know how the Germans, the salute the Germans have, the Roman salute?
Yeah.
Do you know why that is?
Well, are you talking about the three-finger salute or the Heil Hitler?
No, the one when they do the Roman thing and they stick the hand on Heil Hitler. You know where that came from?
I thought the Roman army.
Well, it did, but I mean, the reason they chose it is because they were so frightened by World War I's disease that they didn't want to shake hands.
No kidding.
So they instituted that knowing that they were quite frightened by the whole concept, don't touch.
Wow.
So it's just a little aside. But
well, that's a little aside. I mean, you're talking about, what did you say? Maybe upwards of 200 million?
Well, I mean, they knew it. At least 100 million, I think, is a fair guess. And so the Germans about revenge, and it led up to. Now, I'm not doing a history thing, every blow by blow sort of thing, but you can see that Germany's scared and mad and all that sort of thing. So we've made some pretty terrible enemies in our attempt to rule the world. And what I didn't understand, Larry and Scott, maybe y'all can help me on this. At this point, America, in the 30s, as we know, we're going to go into a depression. We're going to have high taxation, and it's going to discourage investments and so forth. We're controlling most of the world and all its wealth. We're controlling 80 to 90% of all the oil in the world. We were Saudi Arabia at the time. And we go into depression. How do you go into depression when you absolutely control everything?
Well, it's fabricated.
Yeah, it has to be.
It's fabricated. Look, one of the things I read one time, which made a lot of sense to me, was, a fellow talking about going through the Depression and how you would walk by buildings, that were once, manufacturing or doing whatever was going on there. The same buildings were there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just there was no activity.
Yeah, there's no money. You can't borrow money if you don't let it borrow money.
That's from the banks again, yeah. So it's fabricated. That's just a fabricated economy.
Yeah.
So why would they do it? Well, so they could take things over for cheap. Let's face it.
So, well, you recall, and this is in the Congress's records, when they went to the gold, when they took the gold away later, and they said, turn in your gold, and people did, and then they reduced it after they got the gold. They reduced the value of it to $35 an ounce. It was much greater than that.
Right.
And then in the record, there's a guy, the senator from, he does this long speech in the House Congress and says, not a senator, I think it was a congressman, and he says, why did all these billions of dollars in gold go to Deutschland, to Bank of Deutschland, German?
It's a good question. Do you know the answer?
It's never been answered to me, but it's a factual thing. So I don't know who we were paying off then, or maybe it's the Central Bank of Germany or something. Anyhow. But anyway, you've got that. You've got economic chaos. You've got Europe so for every practical purpose, you've got Germany looking for the next war, which eventually will come. But in addition to that, we've got to look at Asia, because World War II, as it involved us, is a war on two fronts. So I was going to take a look at I took a look at Asia to see what two places in particular. One was China and one was Japan. And I don't think the war was fought quite the way all the history books are saying. But in China, we have something rather unique. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but the opium trade in China was huge. And all of a sudden, at the end of World War I, between World War I and up in the early part of World War II, before that, all of a sudden it is taken over by the Americans. You've heard of the Flying Tigers?
Yes.
Their main job was to fly dope in and fly it around. You have to understand that China at this time had virtually no roads.
Mm.
Nothing they would take big, heavy loads. They're chopped up into rice paddies and little parts, little farms and so forth. They're not industrialized at all. In fact, it's a terribly difficult place to fight if you're invading army. I mean, a tank cannot go through that stuff. And they are also walled cities. They did that for a reason. They were also afraid of plagues. Are you familiar with the Mongols and how they fought war?
They did it on horseback, man.
They did it on horseback, but they did something rather unique prior to attacking cities and armies. They would send out, and I checked on this morning. It's even in Wikipedia. Wikipedia. They would send out. They understood the bubonic plague, and they were not rats that invaded the cities. They were dribbles, and they carried them around with them, and they would take them out and infected, and they would put them in the cities release them in the cities prior to 2 weeks before they went in and fought them. Wow. Now, the Japanese know this history, the Chinese know this history, and one of the things they started doing was building big high walls and stuff so they could shut the gates on everybody and live in the city to prevent the Mongols from poisoning them with all this disease. So
I got a question for you here.
Okay.
And I hope my phone's not doing an echo because I'm hearing myself come back.
Tiny bit, but I think we're okay. Are we okay, Scott?
Oh, we're fine, yeah.
Okay.
I got a question for you.
All right.
If any of these wars are straight, and this is one that, was always just a giant red flag for me. Mm-hmm. In World War II, as you know, you had the Axis powers, and then you had the Allied powers, from the Western perspective.
Right.
Now, when you set up the G5s, the people that are going to control that, printing press,
mm-hmm.
why in the hell do you give power to Germany and Italy? And France?
Yeah.
France, okay, they got taken over in about 24 hours, then split the country in half and decided to, the Vichy government just decided to, work with the Germans and everything. Why would you give France, and include France in there, France, Italy, and of all people, Germany, mm-hmm. that power?
Why would you build them back up?
Well, I'm asking.
Why would you build back Japan? Why would you stay there until recent times?
Yeah, the Marshall Plan. Yeah. I'm just trying to figure that out because, anybody with a brain has to say, let's see, they were those filthy crowds that we were going to kill and destroy and everything, and they were just monstrous, and they were monstrous, in my opinion, in World War II. Just with what they did with the death camps. And so, after you defeat them, you reward them.
Well,
my head's spinning over here.
Oh, yeah. Well, I took a look at the Asian market, the Asian countries, and those in particular, because those are the two big players, and there's just some interesting things about it that most people don't know.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to do China first. China's divided into 4 groups. Then there's the traditional Manchus, the Qing dynasty, and they were non-ethnic Chinese, and they were kind of the rulers at the time. Then you have the nationalists, and for those of you who recall Chiang Kai-shek, he was the head of the Nationalist Party, and that would have been a natural ally for America if we were playing it straight, you would think. And then you had the Imperial, which are the ethnic Chinese, which are the Han Dynasty, and they were the largest and the oldest group of the batch.
What were they, the Mandarin and so forth?
Yeah, they were the big group, which composed most of the population. And then you had, of course, the Communist Party under Mao Zedong. And we ultimately side with the communists.
Yeah, with Mao. Yeah, I know.
With Mao, and just like we did in Vietnam, initially we were on the communist side and just couldn't come to agreement, I guess, on how we're going to chop up their own country. So they threw us out. And now this is, I found interesting. I can't prove this, but there's an awful lot of material out there. But we took over the drug opium business from England. That's a real business. It was really happening. It's not that's easy to prove. And it's easy to prove that we took it over, and there's some reasons why, but I can't prove those, so I'm not going to go into them. But de facto, we are now controlling the opium business in China. It's one way to control the population. They actually forced it down their throat for business reasons. And the Flying Tigers were delivering it all over because that was the only way to get stuff to all the major cities and so forth.
Major cities in
China. Right, in China. Now, when Mao takes over later, he throws us out. Now, the Flying Tigers were Air America. It's the biggest air force, the biggest dope dealers in the history of mankind, as far as I can tell. And where did we go? We went out to Indochina. And then they appear there after they're thrown out of China.
Yeah, they were called Air America, by the way.
And that's easy to, I know people that know all this stuff.
Well, by the way, I knew a guy that flew for him. And by the way, now we're in a place called Afghanistan.
Isn't that amazing? And
the opium,
but
the heroin. Right.
Yeah, now this is, and heroin is the biggest threat now to Russia. Just like it is in America. It's the #1 drug in America now. It's passing marijuana. The odd, disgusting thing is, in Indochina we had another war. They probably killed 1 million people right next to Vietnam. It's called Laos. In Laos, the mission there for Air America was most of their runs were to fly in rice to Laos. Now, prior to us being there, it was a rice-based agricultural country. Why do you have to fly in rice there? You want to hazard a guess?
Because it wasn't rice.
It wasn't rice that were growing. No, it was rice. But it wasn't rice that were growing there in America. They said the land was too valuable for growing
rice. Yeah, I see. Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, so that's what you're looking at in China is what's going on there, kind of the behind the scenes sort of thing. Then you go to Japan, and we have to deal with Hirohito. And now he was the prince before he became the emperor. And he has an interest in history because he knows about the Mongols, by the way. He is an extremely well-educated, even an English-American style educated person. He was raised by the samurai warlord, and he was trained to be this noble warrior the way the Japanese think in terms.
Yeah, the whole Shinto thing.
Yeah. Right. And he became, though, he saw that because of his Western education and understanding and speaking and being able to read English at least, I believe they said he was quite articulate. He became a marine biologist and also a meteorologist. He saw that there was some value to that. Now, the biology part of him is what he pursued because he was so scared of the Americans' disease, ability to throw these diseases at them, that he developed his own program now to have germ warfare or chemical warfare. Those were the experiments, those horrible, horrible, horrible experiments they did on the Chinese people. And what they were trying to do is to figure out, this is very gross and graphic, so tune out if you have to, because it makes me kind of ill. But they were running experiments like, how long can somebody live? Do we kill somebody slowly or quickly? If you kill them quickly like Ebola does, then everybody runs away. If you kill somebody slowly like what we just discussed in the trenches, then it spreads and you kill off more populations. And the Japanese were terribly scared that the Western powers would do that. And one of the reasons they did that is right about in the early 30s, there were magazines like Collier's. You remember Collier's, kind of like Saturday Evening Post. One big article. There was a guy named Jack London. You probably heard of Jack London.
Oh, sure. He wrote White Fang and Call of the Wild. Sure.
Call of the Wild. But he And he wrote that in an article about in Collier's. And he thought that, and he wrote that the Anglo-Saxon race should destroy China and the Asian horde and replace them and repopulate it all with Europeans. That's in our mass media.
It's amazing stuff, isn't it?
Isn't it? I mean, it's just the backdrop to this. So this is what they're seeing of us. So I mean, why don't they like us? But
I'm also very taken with the amount of the amount of these high-level sophisticates that have been so involved in either propaganda or destruction in war, political actions, giant mega churches that are masons.
Mm-hmm. That blew me away.
It just
very little about that.
Me. There's reams of information about these bombs, you know, and anybody can think whatever they want to. When you start having secret societies, and it doesn't matter of any kind,
yeah,
you know, or you know, you've got top secret clearances. I mean, you got to love the way the military does it. Everything's done on a clearance basis. Right, and you're robbing people blind, and you're stealing what doesn't belong to you, and you're doing it through nefarious means, like as an example, getting us into World War I or getting us into Vietnam or whatever. Nobody's ever held accountable in this country. None of the. I mean, you are. I mean, you could break some minute law, and they're going to hold you accountable. They might throw you in jail or fine you or whatever they're going to do, but the people who really slaughter, you know, as you know, hundreds of millions of people, nothing in the world happens to them.
Yeah. It's how immoral can we be? I mean,
how stupid can we be?
Stupid indeed. Well, we buried right now. Everybody's buried in their cell phone, I guess. There's a couple of things I think we have about half an hour to go here in a minute. And I want to cover a little bit about World War II, just because we know the story, but there's some very interesting things about it. And so we kind of set the thing. We had Germany and Russia and all very upset with their conditions at the end of the dividing up of Europe. And then you also have over here Japan is scared out of their minds, and China is in imperial wars, fighting each other and being exploited by the Europeans and the Americans. So we'll take it from there and go into the next section. Where we're up to, we've got the stage set for what ultimately becomes World War II. There's a lot of things going on besides what we're covering, but some of these are the things that are less or the least talked about of things in the history books, but are all readily available to anyone who wants to dig deep enough. If you want to explore how we became what we are, this is a good place to start. We started, of course, we went to war, the United States went to war, supposedly at Pearl Harbor, but it was a little more to it than just Japanese coming across and attacking us. The Japanese had two things they didn't want to do. One of them was they didn't want to get into a war with us. Number two, they couldn't really invade us per se, because when Hirohito, now the emperor, asked his generals, why don't we just invade them, allegedly, the general, in one of the general's biography, he told them that everybody is armed. Therefore, we could never do anything there, which is an interesting aside. But let's take a look, Larry and Scott. Let's take a look at Pearl Harbor. And Roosevelt had a plan. And what he was doing, he really wanted to start a war with Japan. And I don't know why he really wanted, other than conquest, why you would want to do that, because what most people are not aware of is we had already signed a treaty, a 10-year treaty, with the Atlantic European Mutual Protection Treaty with Britain. So if they went to war, which they were already in war by the time we got involved with Japan, we had already committed our resources to them. Now, not only could we not afford it, we just came up with depression, if you recall. And even though we were an industrial power, floated on credit, if you're supplying everything on the Atlantic Ocean, how do you turn around and start a whole other war in the Pacific?
Right, being two theaters, yeah.
It's pretty tough. It's the Russians. as always, I mean, that's the Germans. That's their problem. They're pinched between.
Sure.
So, but he had a plan. I'm going to show you. It's a very diabolical plan, and most of this information actually has been on TV recently, confirming what I'm about to tell you about a hideous thing that happened in regards to Pearl Harbor. Has been on television in those history channels.
Oh, by the way, Kirk, I actually spoke to a radioman on Midway Island that day.
Oh, did you?
And oh yeah, I got to talk to him. He came into a history class. He and I had a 30-minute discussion, and he told me straight up they were told they were going to be hit that day.
Well, that's what I found.
Oh yeah, well he was there. He was the radioman. I believe him. So I mean, but the Army reports, the reports out there on the thing, everybody knew it. So I'm going to kind of lay this out because most people don't seem to know it. When I talk to people, they go, "What?" But of course, we should all know by now that he's a war criminal. He's a war criminal, straight up, straight up. There were admirals, they wanted the fleet out. He said, "No, you stand down."
Well,
yeah,
well, at least somebody has some backbone, but still, some of this is hard to take. But if you've grown up knowing or thinking what we thought, and then to find all this out, even late in life, is pretty rough to take. And I understand the listeners how this could affect them a little bit. But in the 30s, we had already cracked the Japanese codes. The cryptographers knew exactly what they were talking about. They kept it a very good secret. They did apparently share it with the British, because the British had most of their Air Force, and most of their Navy also in the Pacific Theater as well, protecting Australia and their, obviously, in India and so forth, and Burma. The French were, I don't know whether they told the French or not, but they were in Indochina, and then, of course, the only place that was not under control by those guys was, other than Japan and some of China, was Siam. And they had an army, a military from Portugal that was protecting them from the British and the French. But the Japanese, they decided they had taken enough, and they couldn't get oil, and they were being treated very poorly and so forth, rightly or wrongly. But they decided that they would invade and destroy the fleet in Pearl Harbor and Hawaii. And they sent across their cruisers and so forth, cruisers and their aircraft carriers to attack it. And we knew it was coming, and we did a couple of very strange things that I didn't know about. We took our Navy in three parts. We had a three-prong or three-wave counterattack plan for them. We knew they were coming. We were going to let them do it. Number one, that's pretty sad. We're going to let them do it, and then we sent our things out ahead of time out into the ocean. You had the Saratoga and his group in one place, the Lexington and his place with his group in another place, and then over here, I think it was in the rear that would have served as the third wave counterattack was the Enterprise. And what happened was, if you read the records of the people, the men who were killed in Pearl Harbor when the Air Force attacked them and they didn't know they were coming, because they told most of the officers and things, but I don't think they really realized, most of the information I have is not, all of them didn't know this was coming, or they wouldn't have been down below in those ships, or they'd been on the decks if somebody had really told them, and they could have told them, because they certainly knew it was coming, and they were tracking them all the way across. Now they were having radio silence, remember, out there in the ocean, so they couldn't tell them. But gosh, seemed like they could have prepared them better. But what did we lose? About close to 3,000 lives there.
Yeah, it was 3,000. They're called carrier battle groups, is what they're called. But they knew they were going to be hit that day. That day, for a fact. For a fact, they knew it.
Yeah. If you read the rosters, all of them were young recruits, new people, young kids. All the veterans were gone, and they were kind of sitting ducks, and they let them go on the way. And also, the Japanese recorded that they couldn't believe it when they got there, and they knew that they knew something was up, because they had aligned 2 and 3 deep, every ship within 500 yards of each other. And the Navy that was there was all World War I. In fact, I forget the name of the aircraft carrier that was there was not even an aircraft carrier at all. It was a World War I Navy ship, and they had converted it to an aircraft carrier and put some old planes on it. And they said they've never seen a military harbor designed that way, where all they had to do was just drop bombs in a row and they could blow up the whole darn thing. I mean, that's what happened in Pearl Harbor. And then when the tragedy of it is when the Nimitz sent out there, they were primarily airplanes with torpedoes. However, they sent out a scouting party to see what was going on. And they turned back after they saw the retreat. Now, that was about at 7:30 a.m. I think the attack was at like 6:45 a.m. It's about 7:30 that Nimitz sends out his scout planes. They're radio silence. And they went out and saw it, and they wanted to come back and report that they were retreating. Because I think the Japanese at that time must have known, at least the historians tell us they must have known. And they had come back to the Enterprise. And the Enterprise was so nervous, the captain and sorry I don't have his name in front of me, I did at one time. He was so nervous about the planes flying back in, he didn't know which plane was which, that he fired on them. What was his?
Was that Bull Halsey we're talking about? Yes,
that's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. But he fired on them, and they didn't know what to do, so they flew towards Hawaii, and I was watching the History Channel the other day about this very incident, and they actually 2 pilots survived, and one of them just got lucky, and the other one he had to actually destroy a anti-aircraft group on the island so he could land, because at that time they were firing at everything they could see because they had no leadership at all to tell them anything that was going on.
Right, if it's in the air, let's knock it out of the air. We're tired of getting killed down here.
But the fact that the admiral on the Enterprise wouldn't let anybody land, I mean, he sent them out. Surely they could tell. I mean, we're just what a cowardly thing.
Yeah, and they make heroes out of all these guys. It's just astounding to me. I told you before, one of the most despicable things was the drugs that they used. And I'm not even talking about to create pandemics. I'm talking about, to where guys could fight nonstop for 2 days, and they would be, they would be brave beyond belief. I mean, first the Germans did it. That's who developed methamphetamine, and then the Americans did it, and they came up with a little better one, because not only did you not have to sleep and not have to eat, but it made you brave.
Made you very aggressive.
Yeah, so you went out there and you fought to the last man until you died. I mean, that's how they tried that stuff out. I mean, they did it with British troops is what they did over in North Africa when Rommel was, kicking their butts. They sent in an entire regiment or tank regiment, whatever it was, maybe a battalion. Maybe it was just a battalion. And they fought to the last guy, and they all got wiped out, and they said, yeah, this is what we're going to use. I mean, how do you like that?
How do you do that?
Every one of them died. That's what we're going to use.
Yeah.
Lovely. I mean, that means your judgment stinks,
Well, we got a real Masoma problem, don't we? This is an understatement of the world.
Wow. And that's who's running things. And I think, it no longer, there's nothing. I doubt if there's anything you could tell me that would surprise me or shock me.
I can sicken you, but I can't surprise you. Well, I'm going to sicken you now. This is...
okay, go ahead.
By the way, that was the USS Utah. It was that fake that World War I thing with the top on it.
Yeah.
So, if anybody's doing a little research, they can find that, right? The salvage divers, all these things are stuck in the water now. It's sunk. All men on board are in there. For 2 weeks, the divers who went down there to examine the stuff heard Morse code knocking on the thing. I'm here, please help me.
Yep.
And they were told to ignore it because they obviously must have known something was up, and they were told to ignore it. And if you didn't, we would court-martial you and you'll be shot.
A guy's desperate down there, just, in some compartment where he's got some air and he's sitting there just, tapping out Morse code or whatever. Yeah, I just.
That was reported on a guy that was one of the. His father was one of the divers or something. They told him, so I can't prove a lot of that, but based on what I know. So
I've heard that too. I've heard that too. Yes, I have. And
I've never heard that part before, but that was. It seems vaguely familiar when I heard.
Where it really should get people is that in these recruitment propaganda films and slogans and everything, we take care of our own. We never leave anybody behind. We think as a unit. We act as a unit. And what it really is you're just being used as a bastard stepchild.
Yeah, you're a fodder.
That be?
Yeah, just total fodder.
Yeah,
for their ambitions. It wasn't for any cause that was worthwhile. I'm not going to go through World War II. We know how it is. I mean, that set us up.
It was over steel, wasn't it? Japan and America, and I have to go back. It was mainly over steel, if I'm not mistaken.
Still, but they couldn't get oil. Remember, we supplied 95% of the oil, or 90%, anywhere from 80 to 90% of all the oil in the world.
We were Saudi Arabia at the time. Yeah,
we were, absolutely were. Now, here's one of the things that happened. We obviously sign off on treaties. I don't think the war ended quite the way everybody says. I can build a pretty good case that it was more treaty.
A gentleman's agreement around the table.
We're going to stop because there's even some information that would indicate that the Japanese may have been working on an atom bomb, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless, we settled. We had troops there. But think about this from an economic standpoint. We had blown up so much of them that they're not the type of people that would really love to have an army occupying them. But the army that occupied them, when you throw in billions of dollars to rebuild your infrastructure, and they become a superpower, economic superpower, as Germany did, Japan I'm talking about, come 20 years, 25 years later, that's a strange thing you do if you went to war with somebody who you really thought was that evil. But anyway, we talked about that a minute ago.
Or making them part of the, you're also in charge of the printing press and everything.
Economic.
Yeah, it's insane.
So that is always disturbing. That so that just lie on lie. Now some concluding remarks, and then if we, depending on how much time we have, we'll cover some things that God said, just to give you all Yahowah said, just to get a head start on the next conversation we have about Samuel. But what you have as a result of the end of that war, you have you have killed hundreds of millions of people, and you've damaged. If the count's only 100 million for World War II, which is a really conservative amount, then there's hundreds of millions of wounded, both mentally and physically. You've accomplished absolutely nothing that I see that we supposedly started out to do. You certainly didn't defend us, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We've escalated everything and put us back to where we're still fighting a Cold War, and you're still about the same thing we were in World War I with Europe, namely Germany and Russia would still want to go down and get the oil. We're fighting over the oil. I'll tell you why that is the case in a minute. Everybody's going nuclear. The only reason we don't need to have the pestilence by anthrax, I guess, is because we can drop enough bombs and destroy the world in such a way that what's not been bombed will have a nuclear winter, which would cause disease and death.
Or radiation. That'll radiation.
Yeah.
Just over time. Sure.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we just degenerated into a cesspool. And there was an interesting article in Time magazine in 2010, and what it arrived at the labs, and I think it was Merck or one of those, they had to be given $1.2 billion to develop anthrax, and they said they had done it, and it was potential to kill 1 billion people per vial for a 1 ounce vial.
1 billion people in a 1 ounce vial.
Potentially. I don't know how you could spread it, but they said, if they could spread it around, they could kill up to 1 billion
Well,
people.
I believe one of the seven problems in the 7-year tribulation is pestilence.
That's what started the whole discussion with me, or the whole research thing with me. And now here's an interesting story. At the end of the war, we have used up, we being the United States, we have used up 95% of all our oil reserves. There's a meeting on the USS Nimitz between a guy named Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and with a guy who calls himself King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. I think it was the first one. Well, I may not have Faisal, but it was that family, the Saud, House of Saud. And he comes on board, and he is saluted, and they sign an agreement that they will buy oil only with dollars. Thus, the birth of the petrodollar took place there. And concluding things he did is he brought them a whole bunch of sheep. Now, you know what the sheep were for?
I have no
They weren't
idea.
for eating. They weren't for eating, but they were for the sailors. It was a tremendous insult, but the historians say that Roosevelt thanked him very much, accepted the kind gift, and had the men salute him as he took off.
Wow. You know, one of the ingenious things they did to solidify the dollar, too, after World War II, and I forget exactly who came up with it, I read it some years back, was that they took all the currencies and they actually used the U.S. dollar as the benchmark for trading all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, so that was the petrodollar, as you're calling it, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it just has to be based on something if you give up the gold standing and so forth. But the interesting part about that was there was a point in time when we were devoid of oil, and we allied ourselves with Saudi Arabia. So when you see why are we with the Sauds, why are we so involved with the Sunni Muslims of that oil-rich nation and nowadays we know we have enough oil anyway. We've recovered.
Oh, sure.
We don't need their oil.
Yeah, and by the way, we still are. We still are in debt with them. I mean,
I know, that's kind of where it started. We've always sought out the easy oil there, but my gosh, this is just horrible stuff. Let's conclude. I don't know how much time we have. Maybe about 10 minutes. Can I ask? About 10 minutes. Let's go over, Larry. You and I will go over. I've got kind of a rough 10 statements in 1 Samuel 8. When if you want a king, here's the terms and conditions that we said the mitzvah of the king. And it says the first one I wrote on my list was I'm going to take your sons. He'll take your sons unto him to be soldiers, horsemen, charioteers, i.e. an army, and they will go into battle. He'll appoint officers and captains, commissioned officers over you, because they will get rewarded, and they will make war machines. He'll take your daughters. They'll become servants to them. He'll take your harvest, your food, and your land, your paycheck, and he'll give it to the army. He'll take 10% for his officers. He'll pay them off. Your transportation, your animals, your means of plowing your fields. He's also going to take, Yahweh says, he's talking to Shaul here as an example, a metaphor for all kings. He'll take 10% of your sheep and your servants. You will serve him And Yahowah, he said, will not hear, I, Yahowah, I will not hear you, for you have chosen him. Well, that's pretty much the program there as far as well,
I mean, that's pretty much where we're at, isn't it? A world of people that don't listen to Yahowah at all. They don't even know his name. They don't even care to know his name.
Right.
You've got people that claim to base some large amount of, their life on dedicated to knowing God and his truth and his word. And you start showing them extant words and how they don't match with what's in their book named after the sun goddess, Biblias. And you show them this, and they go, I refuse to look at this. I'm stupid. I'm blissfully stupid. I'm blissfully unaware, and I'm going to maintain that, and you're a jerk for showing me.
Yeah.
That's what we get, basically. And so, we're in a world where billions of people are going to die over the next 15 years, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's going to happen. There's going to be no question about it. What's that?
I say, it's no way to slow this down from happening.
No, I don't care to slow it down. I don't. I care to share Yahowah's words with people who really want to listen. And then that's it. I'm not going to drag anybody kicking and screaming out of Babylon. I'd be outside the Torah if I did that.
Well, that was my only reservation to, on doing a program like this, even though it wasn't to titillate your ears or anything, or it was to, but you expose these things, but if it's not an alternative, then why do it? I don't shout, the sky.
No, I mean,
if there's no escape, I mean, but there is an escape, and that's as Yahowah. He's told you how he could save you, just like he told Noah and his family, his sons' families, how he would save them. And it does no good to recognize how bad something is. I mean, it certainly does. You can try to get away temporarily, but if there's not an alternative.
There's a lot of people on FD that are constantly exposing the NWO, and the stuff they're putting out is verifiable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. But most of them, what their answer is, most of them, their answer is to vote some other guy in.
and that's another king.
Well, here's the truth of it. People that will kill 40 million people, okay, to gain something, to improve their position on the world stage or whatever it is they're doing, enrich themselves, whatever. People who will do that, I've got news for America and the rest of the world too. If voting mattered, they wouldn't allow you to do it. In other words, they're not going to leave it up to Scott and Larry and Craig and Kirk as to whether or not they get to maintain their trillions of dollars and their private armies.
Right.
That's not how things work.
Yeah.
If voting mattered, it wouldn't be allowed. That's a famous quote from Mark Twain, I think.
Yeah. My wife uses that a lot. If it mattered, they wouldn't let you do it.
Well, yeah. And that's true. And now, for the people that were listening to this show, they understand that these great American heroes have killed tens of millions of people intentionally. Well, our own people intentionally.
Yeah. They care for no life at all. They only care for their power and their position. The good thing is for those that they want to know how to avoid that and why is I like that Craig is going to do the simulate and death because the beauty of the Torah to me, as I've been able to study it for the last 8 years, is that it's provable, it's verifiable. You can check it. I don't speak a lot of foreign language, but I can certainly, I don't speak any foreign language other than Southern, and I can build a library with lexicons and dictionaries and all, and I can check every word and every source. And with a computer nowadays, you can even have more, and you can absolutely verify that this is the words that Yahowah spoke. And I'm really excited that next week he's going to do that with Samuel 8. I'm looking forward to being part of that, because not only does that prove what's wrong, but it points us in the right direction back to the Bereth covenant.
Yeah, I'm glad, and that is the answer. It's go to the only straight game in town.
Right.
And the Torah does prove itself. You know, where people, you know, words mean things. You know, flat out, words mean things. And when I hear people, they have Yahweh's name, and then they're going, my faith in Yahweh. You know, faith in and of itself is a pagan concept. You were talking about how the Torah proves itself. Absolutely. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
You know, Yahweh says his children are separated not for lack of the pagan notion of faith, taken, by the way, from the Roman goddess Vitus of loyalty. That's where but it's from lack of knowledge. And the truth is that Abraham did not walk out of Babylon because he had faith or belief in that there was a God. It's because he had come to know Yahweh and he came to trust and rely on him. So when you see that word faith in your religious material, it's a religious notion. It's no good. It doesn't count. It's trust and rely out of knowledge on Yahweh. That would probably be a better way, out of knowledge. And knowledge comes from knowing, not from guessing or believing because somebody told you something.
Yeah.
Or hoping.
It's straight out is verifiable. Everything in the Torah is verifiable. We've learned that like last week with Roy, and all the scientific approach to Genesis. That was just fascinating to me. I like Roy's mind.
Oh, I do too. I mean, I listen to him. It's, you know, ever since we got into the relativity, and then we know how time rolls out, and we can show that's how the fossil record shows up, and each of those. But I guess the best way to put it is epochs of time. You know, you can't. You know, go talk to an odds maker and see what the odds on that are.
Yeah, impossible. They can't count that out.
Yeah, right. And so, you know, when we sit down and we look at things like relativity, or we look at random chance, you know, I pointed out one time, you know, I trained bodybuilders. Way back, I always wondered, why is everything L this? L, every amino acid, you know, is L-arginine or L-orthanine, you know. And what it really comes down to is if you look into a microscope, it will look like it's turning to the left, counterclockwise. Now, what if you had something right-handed? You know, some amino acid that was right-handed. A tree is an example. I mean, there's tens of thousands of different kinds of trees. You know, if it's a random chance, one of them would have that right hand. You know?
Well, I see our time's come up, but I've enjoyed it immensely.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Nasty subjects, but so see you next time. Okay.